I want to make something clear before we get started. I, like many of you, or at least some of you I would imagine, am not exactly a huge fan of the sheer quantity of isekai anime that we get with each new season, especially when compared to the number of anime that we get from some of my other favorite genres, science fiction for example. I don't enjoy opening each new seasonal chart, scrolling about halfway down, and almost instantly getting hit with the sensation that there are anywhere from 12 to 20 either isekai or what many people call native isekai shows. Those basically being isekai shows masquerading as fantasy shows. I say that primarily because I often find myself getting recommendations for new fantasy shows, checking them out, and almost instantly realizing that what I'm really watching is an isekai that's missing the first episode, which I think is really kind of the core root of why this native isekai term has come about. Obviously, I realize that isekai are nonetheless incredibly popular. I would imagine they're incredibly popular in Japan. They're probably incredibly popular with youth audiences, teen audiences, and generally speaking, much of the same audience that consumes battle shonen and power fantasies, generally speaking. But for me personally, I'm generally not a huge fan of the more generic shows within the genre and just how many of them that we get with each new passing season. And yet, ironically, I find myself in a predicament this season where 3 of my favorite ongoing shows are long-running isekai, and that might even get bumped up to 4 of my favorite ongoing seasonal anime once I catch up with the Saga of Tanya the Evil. Shamefully, I never actually watched the movie, so I'm gonna need to catch up on that before I get started with the second season. But in that vein, I kind of just wanted to sit down and riff for a couple of minutes on those 3 ongoing seasonal isekai anime, because I would imagine not only are there a lot of people who are currently watching these and enjoying them, but also because I would imagine there are a lot of people like me who have, generally speaking, sworn off taking the time to check out most isekai anime, as well as people who just lost track of these 3 shows in particular, who might nonetheless be interested in catching up on and continuing with these. And the first one that I wanted to sit down and talk about, because I get the impression it's the one that the least number of people are talking about, would be Slime Isekai. Obviously, anyone who checked out the series at all will know that Slime Isekai started off really strong with the first episode and a first season, generally speaking, that really clearly had a team behind it who was passionate about the story, going out of their way to give it a absolutely sublime and unique presentation, especially the way that Rimuru as the slime was animated in that first season. It was a really unique presentation, and I think that the first season really done a great job of not only capturing the core appeal of isekai in general, but also capturing the appeal of watching someone basically simulate a video game playthrough of a world building scenario, like almost like watching someone play a Civilization game, but in the form of an isekai anime. It was relatively fast paced in my opinion compared to a lot of the series overall, and the combination of obviously the honeymoon phase of the anime and a fairly superb production and presentation, especially for one of these long-running isekai anime, really helped to carry that first season for a lot of people. Obviously, this sort of anime, and arguably anime in general, puts a lot of the heavy lifting as far as core ideas and the introduction of interesting new characters often into that first batch of episodes in that first season. And over the years, not only have there been a lot of characters and plot points that I think many of us have missed and wondered if they would ever, have their come to fruition moment or not, but over the years, not only has the show sort of fell into its natural state of politics and of slow burning scenes of characters sitting around engaging in politics and diplomacy, but also it could be argued that the wait for the sort of come to fruition moment for many of those really early on introduced subplots and characters, the wait for the come to fruition moment for many of those things has been very long, and much of what we've experienced while waiting for those come to fruition moments, as well as obviously the big climax climactic battle moments has felt a bit long in the tooth. It's taken quite a while in between big climactic action set piece moments, and it's taken even longer to feel a sense of resolution on some plot points that were even set up in literally the very first arc of Slime Isekai Season 1. But we are now currently, some 70 or so odd episodes into the series, actually beginning to get the resolution on some of those plot points that were set up all the way back in that first arc, including finally getting some resolution even on the freaking Shizue subplot, which it feels like I've been waiting on for freaking forever, to the point that I was beginning to wonder if we would ever get anything in regards to her. And one of the beautiful things is, actually, because the show has taken so long to set up all these different factions and all these different points of politics and diplomacy and lore around the heroes and the demons and the like, we actually find ourselves now at a point in the story where Shizue and all of the different characters related to Shizue, whether that be her teacher, her students, the other legendary heroes, or even the Demon King Leon, all of these characters are now deeply rooted within the lore, some of the most important key plot points, and obviously the current climactic big battle set piece thing that's happening. And although I had been becoming quite impatient with the series myself, I do now find that the weight and the willingness to slowly set all of that up season after season has actually been quite worth it, now seeing all of these different disparate elements converge, some of which were set up 3 seasons ago. And I have to say, it's built a lot of trust in the series for me. Although this is definitely, once again, absolutely a slow burn experience, full of sometimes somewhat dry scenes of characters just sitting around engaging in diplomacy and political shenanigans, as well as, of course, plenty of slice of life type elements, throwing parties for other nations and all of this sort of stuff. All of the different elements that really do sometimes feel as if they drastically slow down the pace in between the darker moments within the series and the more climactic battle moments within the series. I've actually come to find all of that quite endearing, and I quite appreciate the fact that the series is actually willing to really take its time. And another thing that's worth pointing out, I don't want to overhype this too much, especially given the standard that some people have for battle shows these days, but also I do think you can tell that the people working on this season know that they're working on some of the most climactic moments in the entire series, because the production for the big battle scenes and the like recently has actually been quite stellar at times. I'm not saying the show looks absolutely amazing episode to episode, but you can tell they know when they need to flex it and really push the production to make those big moments hit, and I really appreciate that. I'm glad that I sat through this one, even if possibly the majority of these 70 or so odd episodes have been quite slow and have at times perhaps tested my patience a bit. But anyway, I probably rambled on that one for long enough at this point. The second show I'd like to go ahead and talk about for a few moments is probably the most obvious one. For all the controversy that there may be around Mushoku Tensei, the reality is the series is incredibly freaking popular. A mostly gorgeous production now in its 3rd season. Once again, with a lot of long-running plot elements finally starting to come to a head. And ironically, for all of the so-called controversy around this series, I actually find that the series is, in its current state, more wholesome than it's ever been.
1 week later.
Not only more wholesome, but more thoroughly backed up by events that have really tested the merit of our main character Rudius and so many of the party members around him. Some people like to think of Rudius as nothing more than a pervert, and Mushoku Tensei as nothing more than a shallow, disgusting, perverted isekai anime. But in reality, I really think that Mushoku Tensei has, I wouldn't say grown past, but more so kind of transcended that genre of isekai. At this point, I find it difficult not to just think of Mushoku Tensei as one of the greatest modern fantasy anime. It's got a deep-rooted lore, a lot of long-running plot points and mysteries, continents and factions and legendary titles, an interesting magic system, just a really deep-rooted fantasy lore in general. And once again, I would argue that the show has become more wholesome and more thematically deep, more of a story of growth than any of the haters would ever be willing to give it credit for, and it makes you wonder how many of them have even watched the show. At this point, Rudius has lost loved ones, both literally and through emotional rifts. He has a sickly mother who him, his party, and his extended family now have to take care of day to day. Rudius has started a family, essentially put down roots with that core and extended family. He's expanded his horizons, continuing to take on new disciplines. He's working to clear the name of the Superds and at least doing what he can to be as diplomatic between different factions as he can. He's been working alongside Nanahoshi to attempt to solve the mystery of the teleportation incidents. And just generally speaking, he has turned into the kind of character who has not only gone through multiple heartbreaking events, but has also grown as a person through all of them and become a character who, while they may have started, very much an unconventional family, and while they may still have some of their hidden, arguably perverse quirks, they've nonetheless managed to become a flawed character, and yet a character who you can really look up to nonetheless as being someone who has transcended their tragedies and their past mistakes and become a character who works proactively to better not only his own life, not only the life of his core and extended family, but the lives of all of the different people who have helped him along the way. And I can't help but find it almost frankly embarrassing how many people still think of that show as a shallow, perverted isekai, when in reality, I would argue the show is just as good, if not better in many ways, than shows like Frieren and Dungeon Meshi. And by the way, that's not me knocking either of the other two shows. What I'm saying is all three of these are unironically great fantasy anime. As Lao Tzu said some 3,000 years ago, Frieren is great, Dungeon Meshi is great, and Mushoku Tensei is great. These are the three great fantasy anime of our generation, and Mushoku Tensei is one of them, and you just better get used to it.
Fucking dumbass.
And just once again has absolutely and completely transcended its genre as an isekai at this point. And it is worth asking the question, perhaps, between 40, 50, 60, 70 episodes into an isekai, just how much the actual setup of the series as an isekai matters. But obviously the fact that they're still trying to solve the teleportation event and the phenomenon itself of teleportation, which is almost certainly involved in the actual isekai reborn phenomenon itself. Obviously that does continue to ground it as an isekai, even if it is an element which has arguably been pushed very much into the background of the series. But yeah, other than that, as I said, I think that Mushoku Tensei has really proven itself as a series which was written and produced by an author and a staff who have really went above and beyond to create something with a deep, fascinating lore and lovable, flawed, but lovable characters. And I also quite appreciate, once again, its ability to spend long-running periods within the story just allowing you to experience the wholesome daily lives of the core family. It kind of feels after that last episode as if maybe the wholesome times are over for a little while. Feels like shit's about to go down, but I do really appreciate that dichotomy that the show has built between the wholesome family building, bettering oneself through one's education and all that, the dichotomy between that element and all of the deeper, darker fantasy lore elements and all of the climactic events that those are clearly building to, including what I'm assuming is about to be a very chaotic event coming up after what just occurred in that last cliffhanger. Given how long things have been this wholesome and this calm, seeing what just happened and the location which our characters are currently in where that event happened, I definitely think we're about to see the pace and the intensity turn up again for the first time in a while. And as much as I hate what just happened, for anyone who's kept up with the series, they'll know it's terrible, and it did leave me pretty flabbergasted with that cliffhanger last week.
You can't keep getting away with it!
But other than that, the one other thing that I'll say about this recent season is I really appreciate what a good job they've been doing of showing us this dual plot line alongside showing us Rudius's continued adventure with his family and with the university life he's been going through, showing us that alongside Eris's training, clearly like slowly building us up with the expectation that at some point an incredibly powerful Eris is going to come back and find Rudius with his 2 new wives. It is really genius. Not only the way that it's been paced out, the way that things have been flip-flopping back and forth, but the way that they've managed to build up my expectations for a moment that I know is coming and yet have no idea how it's gonna go. I'm really enjoying that. Enjoying it both for the experiential nature of watching it happen, but also enjoying it because I can't help but keep theorizing about how things are going to go down once these disparate elements once again converge with one another. But yeah, obviously that's a scattered mess of thoughts, and I've been yapping for a while, so I'll try to keep it short for the third one. But the third one, and this one is once again probably quite obvious, has to be ReZero. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think for a lot of people who have kind of sworn off isekai, generally speaking, as popular as this series is generally, I think this might be one of the harder ones for people to get caught up with. I know for me personally, although I absolutely loved season 1, thought that the conceit of the show was really interesting, really loved the themes of season 1, really appreciated the production as well as the fairly unfiltered, gory aspect of the series, and just how honest the series was willing to be about how terrible so many of the situations were. But generally speaking, I just loved the themes of season 1 and felt, much like the stuff that I was talking about with Mushoku Tensei earlier, felt that it also done a great job of building up the lore, your expectations for different continents and locations where we're going to be going to, all of these legendary characters like the witches and the dragon and the like. Season 1 gave you a lot of great themes, a lot of great production, and a lot of clearly more long-term stuff to look forward to, as well as a lot of visual interest in all the different locations that they went to. But unfortunately, and I know this isn't the opinion everyone holds, I know a lot of people have loved every single season, but for me personally, and for a lot of the people that I've talked to IRL, season 2 was a bit of a slog. Not to say that there wasn't a lot of important stuff going on, not to say that we didn't get a lot of character development, but just the reality that the location that they were in and the prolonged nature of the arc was really difficult to sit through. There's very little that's interesting about watching characters stand around in a forest for 20-something episodes talking about their feelings. It's just not that entertaining. And for a series which, once again, done such a great job of giving us visual interest and great lore and great locations and the like in season 1, I do think season 2 really dropped the ball with that element and took just a little too long to get us where we were going. In the famous words of Best Guy Ever on that one episode of Content years ago,
"Everyone shut the fuck up, but it's a light novel and they have to include all the fucking dialogue, so they keep talking. They just keep talking." That should be the name of this episode.
And yet, nonetheless, once again, perhaps that makes this the most surprising one of all. I had so many issues with season 2, and yet, in season 3, seeing them go to the sort of Venice-like water-flowing city, seeing all of the different princess and king candidates and the like come back, really brought back a lot of the old interest that I had for it. And although I do have a deep-rooted fear that this season, seeing us stuck in this sort of library-like labyrinth, risks falling into the same pitfalls that season 2 did, with characters just sort of spending most of the time standing around talking in the woods. Although I'm absolutely terrified that this season could also fall into that same trap. I have to say I have really been enjoying Shala as a character. I think she's very entertaining. The Beast Girl getting brought back has also been a fairly interesting wild card element. And seeing the lore continue to expand and seeing old characters and old ideas come back into relevance has been a lot more satisfying than I ever really thought that it would. This season has also, in my opinion, been arguably as dark as the series has ever been. Perhaps not in the sense that it's been gorier than it's ever been, but in the sense that we've seen characters, you know, influenced by that dark, chaotic magic miasma, whatever they call it. In their influence from that, seeing the characters absolutely lose their minds and basically just wind up murdering each other in a frenzy as they not only become dehydrated, lose their patience with one another, and succumb to the magic miasma, which causes them to slowly lose their wits. It's been fascinating and incredibly dark, but incredibly dark in a way that I didn't really expect the series to go to. The series has obviously always had lots of horrifying situations, gory deaths and the like, but this series has really hit on a psychological horror thread that I never expected the series to go to. But aside from that, once again, I've just really been enjoying the characters, seeing so many old characters and so many lore elements coming back into the limelight. And I guess that perhaps brings me to the sort of point of similarity between my enjoyment of all three of these series, is that while each of the three series has expected a lot of patience out of us as viewers, I do think that all three of them are currently doing a fairly good job of pulling many of those disparate elements that they've been setting up back to the forefront. It's been a long time coming, but all three of them, to varying degrees obviously, have been fairly satisfying to watch. So hope that you enjoyed this. Hope that you've been enjoying these shows. If you haven't and you are once again someone who has sort of sworn off isekai in general, maybe some of this might have got you interested. Otherwise, I will say, over the years, some of my other favorite isekai, Konosuba is a pretty obvious one. The Eminence in Shadow is also a really great one. These are both obviously quite popular. Oh yeah, and Kamikatsu as well. I know almost everyone just made fun of it when it was airing, but don't believe the slander. I swear to you, Kamikatsu is one of the funniest shows that's come out in years. And if you actually give it a chance, you will realize very quickly that all of the utterly terrible CG and all of that stuff is completely 100% on purpose. There are 1,000,001 ways that the show makes it obvious that it's bad on purpose, and it is a hilarious train wreck to watch. So yeah, check out Kamikatsu if you want another hilarious isekai show. I've definitely enjoyed Overlord, although I'm not sure that it's ever reached the same peaks that it did in either the second or third season, when it really had its, what would you call it? Its so-called non-aggression principle moment, when the adventurers came in to steal Ainz's treasures. Not sure that Overlord has ever quite reached that heights for me again, but I've quite been enjoying it as well. And yeah, I guess point generally speaking just being for all of the, in my opinion, generic garbage that's often nonetheless popular anyways, that the isekai genre has given us, it has also absolutely given me some of my favorite shows in recent years, and it's worth giving credit to that where credit is due. Not a huge fan of a lot of these shows, but some of the standout examples really are excellent shows. So yeah, hope that you'll check out some of those if you haven't already, and peace as always.